Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Wednesday afternoon session, 2 p.m., January 25th, 2017. Carla, if you'd please call the roll.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Udaly.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. If you could please call the first item.
Agenda item 85, place a measure on the May 16, 2017 ballot to amend city charter provisions to protect auditors' independence.
If I may, Auditor, before you jump into your testimony, I think it would be helpful if we put the amendments on the table first, including yours, so that everybody understands what the amendments are, and that might help in your presentation to be able to speak to some of those amendments. Just in terms of framing the issue here, obviously the auditor plays an incredibly important function in city government. The auditor is independently elected. The auditor is responsible for ensuring that our city government operates in an accountable manner. The auditor and her team have worked hard to create a program that they would like to refer to the voters. It would be a charter amendment and therefore requires approval from the voters. The city council has to have a majority vote in order to refer this to the voters. So that's the spirit in which we're here today. We've had a work session. The auditor and her team have met with all of our offices individually to walk through some of the specifics related to this issue. Of course, some of us, I think just about all of us, have amendments that we would like to propose to this, and we may or may not have the opportunity to vote on this, just depending upon how much time we have. This could potentially get carried over to next week. If that's the case, we still have plenty of time to put it on, well, not plenty, but we have time to put it on the ballot. So we'll take it from there. I'd like to start by asking each commissioner if they have amendments to read those amendments and briefly describe those amendments to the degree that they feel sufficient. My intention is to second all of them for discussion purposes. We won't actually be voting on the amendments. We'll just be putting them on the table so that people have a chance to reflect and respond to them. After the auditor's presentation, there will be an opportunity for public testimony. I don't think I'm going to read the entire statement again. It's pretty common sense. If you are a lobbyist, please disclose that. If you are here representing an organization, please disclose that. And importantly, please keep your testimony to this particular issue. With that, I will ask my colleagues if they have any amendments they'd like to put on the table.
Mayor, I have an amendment.
Commissioner Fish.
So I offer the Fish Amendment, which I believe my colleagues have, and it reads as follows. Prior to the adoption, amendment, or repeal of any rule, the auditor shall provide reasonable public notice and opportunity for comment. The auditor may adopt interim rules without prior notice upon finding that failure to act promptly will result in prejudice to the public interest and shall be effective for a period of not more than 180 days. So I move that amendment.
Commissioner Fish, I'll second that for the purpose of discussion.
And Mayor, I have a brief statement in support.
Yes, sir.
If I could. Thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, I believe we do our best work in the light of day, and we can never take public trust for granted. During my 8 years on council, we've adopted many important reforms to increase transparency and accountability. We established a new oversight body for our public utilities, the Portland Utility Board. We made it easier for people to appeal administrative decisions made by the city. We created an independent budget office accountable to the council as a whole. We restored the city's chief financial officer position, bringing back the independent guidance we need to make good decisions about taxpayer money. And last year, we became the second city in the country to require political consultants to disclose their relationships with city council members. Today's proposed charter referral is yet another important reform designed to protect the independence of the elected auditor, the city's watchdog. I support the auditor's proposal for a number of reasons. First, I agree we should update the charter to reflect the increase in responsibilities over the past 30 years. Second, I strongly believe the auditor should have the right to seek independent legal advice. And third, I believe the auditor must have the freedom to issue tough audits without the fear of retaliation from the council or city bureaus. I've heard two basic arguments against referring this package to the May ballot. First, that these changes can be accomplished through changes to our code and not to our charter. While this has been the approach in some other cities, I believe that a charter change provides an extra measure of protection going forward. Second, some argue that this referral has been rushed and that we should hold off until next year. While we should never refer a charter change that is not well considered, the auditor has worked closely with the council to answer questions, clarify details, and to make reasonable changes. And today, I expect that my colleagues will have additional suggestions to strengthen the proposal. I have one of my own, and that's not unusual. I see no reason for further delay. The debate today should not be about whether strengthening the auditor's independence is a good idea. Of course it is. On that question, I believe there can be no debate. If this proposal is referred to the voters and passes, successful implementation will depend on a high level of cooperation between the auditor's office, the city council, the mayor, bureau leadership, and the public. And that's true of any charter change. Therefore, my amendment, which I have proposed, provides for public comment in the rulemaking phase, assuming that it is in fact approved by the voters. It was suggested by the League of Women Voters, thank you Debbie Iona and others, and has the support of the auditor. And to our auditor, thank you for the spirit of collaboration and the open mind you have brought to these conversations. Today I look forward to the presentation, the testimony, and our discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Go next.
Commissioner Saltzman, you
sure.
have a package, and if you want to go ahead and introduce them as a package.
It's just one amendment.
Just one amendment.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And it's very simple. My amendment basically would remove placing the ombudsman role in the charter. And I offer that amendment for a couple reasons. I do appreciate the auditor bringing forward her amendments to enshrine the auditor's office independence into the city charter. And I fully support her rationale and reasoning behind her proposals. I have had concerns, however, about listing independent police review and the ombudsman in the charter, and without a chance to take more public input about that. And I think that that's really why I'm removing this, just as the auditor has herself removed the independent police review function from these charter changes. I feel that in order to gather more public comment and thought on that, I think we should do the same with respect to the ombudsman. And this is by no means a reflection on the performance of our ombudsman, past or present. I'm just reluctant to, there's very few positions that are spoken to in the city charter. You know, the city council, the auditor, the treasurer are all spoken to. These are all positions enumerated in our city charter. I'm just reluctant, without more public comment and understanding about that, to place yet another position in the charter, which when you place it in the charter, it's more or less there forever. And I think just as police review is a dynamic, changing environment, I think so is the role of investigating and holding cities accountable. I mean, the ombudsman movement got its start in the 1800s in Sweden and has really grown in popularity, but who's to say, you know, 2 decades from now, there may not be some other better way of holding government accountable than the ombudsman, but without having to, so that's why I would argue that we need some flexibility. At least those are my thoughts, but I would like to have the chance for the council to have a broader deliberation on this, and that's why I would offer my amendment to delete for the time being establishing the ombudsman in the city charter, just as we have deleted for the time being establishing the independent police review office in the charter.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll second your amendment for the purposes of discussion. Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Auditor, for all of the work you've done on this. And I apologize to the public that I've got a lot of amendments, and unfortunately I was still working on them up until 1 o'clock today. And some that the auditor agrees with, and others that we need to have a council discussion on. So I am concerned, as with Commissioner Saltzman, that there has not been a lot of time for community members to know what's being proposed and therefore to comment on it. The first amendments that I'm calling it Fritz number 1 is actually an either-or. The auditor's role in the city has changed significantly over the past 30 years. As such, it no longer makes sense to require the auditor, who is really a manager of a diverse set of programs, no different from the Secretary of State, to be a certified anything. The audits director needs to be a certified accountant or auditor. And unlike the mayors and the commissioners, we don't often get robust elections for the city auditor very often, and that needs to change, especially as a piece of oversight of a significantly more independent auditor under these proposed charter changes. Alternatively, if testimony we hear and the council's discussion says that we still want to keep the qualifications, then we should ensure that the outside oversight of the auditor's office occurs often and in a timely manner. So my second amendment is to, or second alternative on number one, is to require outside oversight every 4 years in the year prior to the auditor's election, so that there is some independent, not the council, looking at the performance with this significant new office.
I'll go ahead and accept them all as a package, and
Thank
then
you.
when we get to the vote, we can vote individually.
Fabulous, thank you. So the next amendment, which we call number 2, is to remove the new provision that the auditor may carry over any unused funds from year to year as provided by state law. None of the other elected officials have that option of not returning ending fund balance to the general fund. Thanks to the resolution that we passed 3 years ago now, the half of any of the ending fund balance is required to go to infrastructure maintenance. So that has something that the auditor and the audits have really said is a good thing, that we need to spend more money on basic infrastructure that may not be all that interesting, but it certainly needs to be done, like the roofs and such. Over the past 5 years, the Auditor's Office has returned over $2.2 million of unspent resources, which is certainly a credit to her fiscal responsibility. That money has been used to address our existing infrastructure maintenance need and the housing crisis. So, like the rest of the council, the auditor should have the ability to request carryovers and request positional authority within the existing budget. I don't see having a carryover of an average of $100,000 is the best choice for taxpayers' money. The next section is very much to speak to my brothers and sisters in the labour unions. We have a classification and compensation structure for a reason. The audits, the charter changes that happened under Mayor Potter in 2007 completely redid the civil service section and made it very clear what the rights of employees in classified positions is. And so I know that this is something that the auditor is intending to provide the same checks and balances and rights with her later administrative rule. So this number 3 is, I messed that up, didn't I? Sorry. There's actually several different amendments in this 2-506, which is again why I wish we'd had a bit more time so I could be more organised. So another one is that the new language says the auditor may appoint employees and establish their compensation. I think we should add within existing classifications and compensation structure, so that we're not giving the auditor ability that none of us have to pay either less or more than the classification range for a particular type of work. What's that? That was 3.
And a 3, right?
Yeah, thank you. There's several in 3. And then thank you for keeping track, Commissioner. No. The next amendments 4 and 5 are ones that the auditor has graciously accepted. In the section on deputies and employees, the proposal said the auditor should establish and administer human resources policies. We need to change that to the mandatory shall. And then further down that, we want to make it really clear that although the auditor gets to propose her budget with no input from outside offices, that the funding of the number of employees that that the auditor states is necessary is subject to funding by the council, that a future auditor could, of course, take any of that uneven balance and move it into new positions. And that's just something that we all can do. But I think it's been very clear that the auditor respects our responsibilities as under state law, as the budget committee, that it has to be the council who makes that decision. In D, there's another, it's about procurement. We're changing another should to shall. And then this is the section that I was talking about earlier. It's 506A. And so we're proposing to strike the language that says the auditor's human resources policies and rules shall provide for cause disciplinary review procedures for an employee who is not an at-will or subject to a collective bargaining agreement. We want to be much more specific to make sure that future auditors know what's meant by that. So we would change it to the auditor's human resource policies and rules shall provide functionally equivalent protections as the classified service, including for-cause disciplinary review procedures for all auditor's office employees, with the exception of the chief deputy auditor, the ombudsman, and the audits director. And employees hired under that section of the charter, of the new section, and who are designated by the council as at will, and also employees subject to collective bargaining agreements are also protected under this amendment.
Very good. I'll second these for the purposes of discussion.
And I'll get them posted on the website as soon as I can so that people can follow them. I would like to actually request that if we could carry over the hearing till the next week, that would allow me and everybody else to really look over what we've done and make sure it's complete.
Very good. Commissioner Daly, before I jump in, did you have any amendments today?
I do not.
Very good. I've only got one myself. Add to the beginning of section 2-508F and 2-509F, adding the language subject to collective bargaining agreements. Let's see if I can speak in English here. Subject to collective bargaining agreements with the city's recognized bargaining units. Add to section 2-509H, the powers and duties of the ombudsman shall not be exercised in contravention of any collective bargaining agreement or obligation of the city, and then continue on with the rest of the existing language.
Second those.
And Commissioner Saltzman seconds that. So we have these amendments now on the table. Thank you.
Excuse
for
me,
your-
Mayor, I have an amendment as
Oh,
well.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes, Auditor.
For the record, I'm Mary Hall Caballero, City Auditor, and I have one amendment, and it is in section 2-504, and it's about the salary, and it makes an effective date of January 1, 2019, and so that would have that section starting at the next full term of auditor.
And is it not that way now? The salary of the auditor isn't that what is the same as the commissioners, right?
It's the same as commissioners in practice, but we're just making that reflective in the document. But just for clarity's sake, I didn't want people to think that this was about a raise for the auditor or something like that while I'm in this position. And so while that's true, it just is establishing the effective date as at the next term.
Mayor, consistent with the rules you established, I will offer the auditor's amendment, and it just requires a second.
That's correct. So Commissioner Fish moves. Is there a second? I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
Could I just say, in response to what you just said, likewise, I don't want people to think that we haven't been paying you properly up till now.
Very good. So now we have all the amendments on the table that people would like to put on the table. Auditor, I'll turn this over to your presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I would just like to note that I have Margie Solinger from my office here with me as well. When Portlanders elect a city auditor, they elect the person responsible for holding city government accountable. There is no asset more vital or fundamental to the ability to fulfill that responsibility than independence, particularly in a commission form of government where council members serve dual roles as the legislators of code and administrators of the executive branch. The independence of the auditor's office is something that cannot be left vulnerable to the politics of the day or the personalities of the moment. Independence was a priority during my campaign for this office and a topic I highlighted in this chamber when I was sworn in. I realized quickly after assuming office, just as my predecessors had warned, that the independent safeguards and charter that may have been adequate 35 years ago are insufficient today. Charter reflects an outdated version of the auditor's office, one that does not accurately portray or protect the comprehensive accountability and oversight operation that it has become. It is for these reasons that I have proposed modest but critical revisions to the city's charter, which can only be changed by a vote of the people. The proposed revisions provide the necessary safeguards to protect the auditor's independence and allow my office to continue its accountability work without perceived or actual interference. My office has been working on this proposal for the better part of a year. I have spoken to and collaborated with community groups, individuals, council members, and city staff. Those conversations were aided by news and editorial coverage that introduced the issue to a wide audience. The documents before you are better than where we started because the people were willing to provide input in the spirit of placing the best option before voters. It's important to remember the proposal we discussed today represents the broad strokes of governance. If adopted by council and approved by voters, there will be an implementation phase where many, many details will be worked through. I look forward to joining council, Mayor Wheeler, and his executive team in a collaborative effort to ensure a smooth and cooperative transition to more independence for the auditor's office. My presentation today will illustrate the problem and provide an overview of my proposed solutions. I will also highlight areas of the proposal that have changed since the City Council work session on January 10th, including some additional improvements since we filed the resolution paperwork last week. Proposed replacement language for Exhibit A of your packet should be before you. We have marked up copies available for members of the public to see the evolution of the document as well. After my presentation, you will benefit from the views of 3 distinguished former city auditors. Following them, you will hear from a representative of a professional auditing association, as well as the director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights. You also have received written testimony from former Secretary of State Gene Atkins and various professional organizations that support the resolution, including the U.S. Ombudsman Association. For oversight entities such as the Auditor's Office to have credibility, they must be independent from those they audit and investigate. To be independent, auditors and investigators must be free in fact and appearance from personal, external, and organizational impairments. The important concept to note is that appearance counts as much as actual interference. Impairments exist when reasonable and informed observers suspect that our objectivity is compromised because we are beholden to or dependent on those we audit and investigate. When the public perceives that the objectivity of the auditor's office is compromised, our credibility as an independent entity is undermined, and the integrity of our audits and investigations may be questioned. Organizational independence can be achieved in a number of ways. One model is to place oversight functions in separate branches of government. For example, at the federal level, Congress has the Government Accountability Office to audit and investigate executive branch agencies overseen by the president. Another model is when an oversight function is at a different level of government, such as when a state office has investigative authority over local governments. Oversight agencies can also be led by an elected official. We have that model with the Oregon Secretary of State, where the Audits Division audits and investigates state agencies. What all of these models have in common is, at a minimum, administrative independence from the entities they audit and investigate. In Portland, having an elected auditor means we have the broad structure in place to have an independent home for oversight. However, the auditor's office is not appropriately independent from the city bureaus it audits and investigates. This is an organizational impairment, partly caused by the evolution of the office over the past 30 years. Prior to 1986, the responsibilities of the auditor's office were focused on administration and financial auditing. we still have those responsibilities and 5 more. In 1986, then City Auditor Jewel Lansing persuaded council and subsequently voters to authorize her to conduct performance audits. That pivoted the office toward its modern function as a comprehensive oversight entity. In 1991, the council and then Auditor Barbara Clark agreed to locate the Code Hearings Office in the Auditor's office to provide it a non-political home and administrative support. 10 years later, former Auditor Gary Blackmer agreed to take responsibility for the Ombudsman and Independent Police Review, precursors of which had been in the Mayor's office. In 2006, the Lobbyist Registration Program was created and placed in the Auditor's office. Charter and administrative practices have not kept pace with this evolution to ensure that the Auditor's office has adequate safeguards to protect its independence. As a result, it does not have the arm's length distance it needs from those it audits and investigates. The good news is that the current charter provides a solid foundation on which we can build. Articles 3 and 5 in Chapter 2 of the Charter describe our government structure like this. Voters elect 6 officials with separate and distinct responsibilities. Commissioners in charge administer the executive branch. The auditor is responsible for independently holding the executive branch accountable to the public. Regrettably, this is not how the structure actually works. It has been eroded by administrative practices that were more appropriate 35 years ago, but no longer are acceptable given the oversight entity that the Auditor's Office has become. This is reality. The auditor is not treated as an elected official, but rather is treated like a bureau. This subordinated position puts the staff in 3 city offices and the commissioners in charge who supervise them between the elected auditor and the voters. The 3 offices that pose the greatest appearance of organizational impairments to the auditor's independence are the city attorney, budget, and management and finance. They exercise control over the auditor at the same time the auditor audits and investigates their operations. The top officials in these offices are appointed by the mayor and serve counsel. The auditor is not referenced in the sections of charter and code that govern them. We audit and investigate all 3 of these offices. The city attorney works for council and reports to the mayor. Yet the auditor is expected to rely on the city attorney's advice for ongoing audits and investigations of the bureaus the council administers. The auditor does not have a separate legal advisor and is prevented by city code from seeking outside counsel without the permission of the city attorney. The Chief Administrative Officer directs the Office of Management and Finance. This position reports to the mayor and works for council, yet exercises control over the auditor's decisions about human resources, procurement, and other internal matters. The city budget director reports to the mayor and serves council, yet the budget office uses the mayor's annual budget criteria to make recommendations that council relies on regarding the level of funding the auditor's office should receive and whether services and positions should be continued or cut. In past years, 80% of the budget office's recommendations about the auditor's budget were accepted by council, whether or not the auditor agreed with those recommendations. So at the very least, we've got an organizational structure that creates the appearance that the auditor's office is impaired by offices the auditor must hold accountable. This fact alone undermines the credibility of the auditor's office. The structural subordination of the auditor that currently exists creates the appearance that the auditor's office is dependent on or beholden to the executive branch. It is not unusual for auditor's office staff to be auditing and investigating bureaus at the very moment we are dependent on them to grant permission for us to take some action, or are simultaneously investigating a complaint against an auditor's office employee. This is untenable in terms of our independence. In the last 2 years, we have audited or conducted investigations into complaints about the City Attorney's Office, the Budget Office, and several bureaus in the Office of Management and Finance, including Human Resources, Procurement, and Technology Services. This circular relationship is problematic for both the Auditor's Office and the bureaus because it introduces the appearance of conflicts of interest and fear of retribution when all parties may simply be doing their jobs. It unnecessarily calls into question decisions made in every transaction. This is especially true for our interactions with the Budget Office and the Office of Management and Finance. There is a similar but different issue with the City Attorney's Office. The City Attorney's client is the municipal corporation. As such, the City Attorney advises the City Council and bureaus as well as the Auditor's Office. When it comes to the Auditor's oversight functions, consultation with the City Attorney's Office creates the appearance of an impairment to the Auditor's independence, and therefore our objectivity. In matters related to audits and investigations, the City Attorney advises both the watchdog and the watched. This is untenable for the Auditor's Office. For example, the appearance of an impairment is most acute when the same attorneys try to advise the Auditor's Independent Police Review and the Police Bureau. This arrangement contributes to the perception that the civilian oversight of police is not sufficiently independent from the Police Bureau. That damages the credibility of my office. To avoid that consequence, my oversight staff and I forego legal advice on certain issues. This constrains our desire to have the best possible decision-making information and potentially increases the list of legal liability. It's hard to think up a worse outcome. The good news is that these organizational weaknesses can be fixed. There are models within our own government and from other jurisdictions that can guide us back to the structure that the public expects and that credible oversight requires. Our proposed solutions were informed by research into these and other jurisdictions and represent what we think are the best elements that would work in our commission form of government. Professional organizations for local government auditors, ombudsmen, and civilian overseers of law enforcement support the proposed charter safeguards that will serve to protect the independence of these functions. These 3 organizations submitted letters of support for the resolution you are considering today. The charter amendments I have proposed would accomplish 2 objectives. They would update the charter so it reflects the modern office and matches function to form, and they would end the auditor's dependence on the bureaus we audit and investigate. The amendments address 4 areas. One amendment would place the ombudsman in charter. You may recall from the prior work session that I originally recommended placing independent police review in the charter as well, but subsequent input from some community groups indicated that it would be premature given the strong desire for ongoing conversations about the structure of police oversight. Today's proposal does not include language specific to independent police review, but it will benefit from the remaining safeguards nonetheless. The Ombudsman has been in the Auditor's Office for 16 years. It is responsible for conducting impartial and in-depth investigations in response to complaints from members of the public who feel wronged by the city. It is a last resort for those who have been unable to resolve their disputes directly with the bureaus or through counsel. The language in the charter proposal mirrors that already exists in code. No new powers are included in the proposal for the Ombudsman. By design, the Ombudsman tries to resolve issues informally and at the lowest level possible. So some in our community may not be as familiar with its work. But for those whose livelihood has been rescued, whose business has stayed open, or whose pocketbook has been protected from unfair charges because of the Ombudsman's office, it is a memorable and vital service. And it does occasionally take on some higher profile issues. Here are some examples. The Ombudsman was responsible for bringing in the FBI after a complaint investigation into transportation employee Ellis McCoy revealed evidence of criminality. Just this past month, the Ombudsman's office issued a report detailing its discovery that the city had been unknowingly losing callback information about tens of thousands of 911 calls for more than a decade. The Ombudsman persuaded council to pass legislation requiring that members of the public be notified of their appeal rights. The legislation also stopped the practice of charging more than $1,300 to appear before the city's hearings officer. Because of an Ombudsman investigation and subsequent advocacy, Portland has the power to punish businesses that defraud the city's program for social equity and contracting. While it's hard to argue the public benefits of these examples, the Ombudsman's office can be a target for political retribution when powerful people do not like the outcome of an investigation. When the Ombudsman exists only in code, its very existence is fragile. The opportunity for retaliation is reason enough to place the Ombudsman in charter, but threats to its funding made by 2 prior mayors make it more than a theoretical concern. Most recently, when the Ombudsman concluded there were undisclosed conflicts of interest among powerful members of an advisory board during the West Quadrant planning process, a former mayor threatened to replace the Ombudsman's office with a website. For as long as the Ombudsman's office exists, it should be protected from retaliation and perceived as independent from those it is tasked with investigating. If at some point Portlanders no longer need an ombudsman, removal of the function should require a vote of the people. The argument for placing the ombudsman in charter is the same one Jewel Lansing made back in 1986 when she sought to place in charter the authority for the auditor to conduct performance audits. In pointed but clear language, Auditor Lansing said, "Right now, I'm doing auditing only at the generosity of council. That means if for some political reason they didn't like an audit that came out, they could just stop it tomorrow. People can't believe that there's no authority in the charter for the auditor to audit, but that's true." A charter amendment protecting the auditor's ability to audit was the sound choice 30 years ago, and it is the sound choice now to protect the Ombudsman's investigations. The second solution is to end the auditor's dependency on bureaus that creates the appearance of organizational impairments. The proposed amendment would place responsibility for internal control with the auditor and require external reviews by independent entities instead of management and finance bureaus. Former Secretary of State Jean Atkins captured the importance of ending the dependency on those we audit and investigate in a letter supporting our proposal. She said, "The power to control and manage our own internal functions is fundamental to faithfully executing our constitutional duties." The Oregon Secretary of State's office is the primary model we look to for how to achieve independence with regard to human resources and procurement. The language is also similar to an example closer to home, the Portland Development Commission. The Commission is a city agency that has independent safeguards for the purpose of insulating spending on urban renewal projects from political pressure. While today's proposal provides for administrative independence, it lands short of that enjoyed by the Development Commission, which has a fully separate infrastructure system from those of the city. We, however, intend to continue in the overhead model for funding, which will allow us to consult with subject matter experts in the bureaus and use existing technology while retaining decision-making responsibility. Let me walk you through the key points in the language regarding employment and procurement, as well as some additional improvements made since the work session. Bear with me through this very text-heavy slide while I cover the main points. The noteworthy replacement language is in the blue box. You can also find it on page 2 of Replacement Exhibit A. The proposal continues to make the auditor responsible for the conduct of the office's 50 full-time equivalent employees, but authorizes the establishment of personnel policies and a disciplinary system for employees in positions not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Collective bargaining procedures would still apply to the 5 employee positions represented by a union. In the very rare circumstances where we need to discipline or discharge employees, those who currently are covered by civil service protections will continue to have them and will have access to a review process by an independent body. This follows the procedures used by the Secretary of State's office, which is not subject to the rules of the Department of Administrative Services, but must comply with state and federal law. Since filing the resolution, we have made some additional revisions to this section that you'll note in the replacement document for Exhibit A. We added a provision that indicates the auditor's office is committed to adopting policies that are consistent with citywide standards for employees, except where those policies conflict with the auditor's independence or ability to fulfill the auditor's duties. Also, while the intent of the original language was to mirror protections employees already have, it was interpreted by some by making all employees in the auditor's office at will. We added language in the replacement exhibit, and Commissioner Fritz has mentioned an additional amendment today to clarify the original intent that employees currently covered by civil service protections will retain similar protections, including dismissal for cause. While the auditor's office enters into only a handful of contracts per year and the median dollar amount is low, the principle of administrative independence from those we audit and investigate applies here too. We have proposed a reasonable middle ground that grants contracting authority to the auditor and requires the adoption of administrative rules, but retains counsel as the local contract review board. In terms of implementation, potential vendors would not detect any change in the process, as the auditor's office intends to continue using the online procurement center for its handful of contracts per year. It is important that the auditor's office assures the public that it is operating efficiently and effectively. To accomplish that, the proposal includes requirements for internal controls and external review that go beyond what currently are in place. Among our existing controls are voters, council's budget authority, standards associated with a required professional credential, peer reviews for audit quality, and internal controls. The proposal would result in the expansion of existing controls and add 2 new ones to assure the public and council that the auditor's office is efficient and legally compliant through organizational assessments and compliance reviews. As with our current peer reviews for audit quality, we would make results of the new assessments public and available to council. In contrast to the individual transaction controls we have now, the additional assessments have the advantage of looking across and more deeply within the office's operations, identifying risks and suggesting areas for improvement. None of this occurs today. The third solution authorizes the auditor to access independent legal advice. This is something that Charter already authorizes for 2 city bureaus, the Portland Development Commission and the Fire and Police, Disability and Retirement. This authority will improve decision-making within the auditor's office by enabling access to independent advice. It will eliminate the problem of sharing counsel with those we are auditing and investigating, and it will enable us to receive legal advice based on our mission of ensuring open and accountable government. The fourth solution relates to the process for the auditor's budget, which is less than 1% of the overall city budget, 0.53% to be exact. it is relatively stable year over year. In other jurisdictions, auditors can bypass the executive branch and directly submit their budget request to a legislative branch. That is not an option in Portland. Addressing the appearance of an organizational impairment during the budget setting process is more challenging here because of council's dual roles as legislators and executive administrators. A consequence of council's fiduciary role over the auditor's budget is that it creates a perception that decisions could be based on a desire to limit accountability. This was especially troublesome last year when the city experienced record revenue and the auditor was the only elective office to take cuts. It is also important to acknowledge that any dollar provided to the auditor is one individual commissioners give up for their own bureaus. This is an inherent conflict caused by the commission form of government and requires that steps be taken to mitigate it. The charter amendment I propose is an incomplete solution, but it represents a necessary first step in the right direction. The proposal is focused on the process and is intended to enable a direct dialogue among the 6 elected officials. It respects council's fiduciary obligation to set the city's budget, but also acknowledges the separate and distinct responsibilities of the auditor. The proposal requires the auditor to prepare a budget request in accordance with state law and submit it for council consideration during the regular budget process. The auditor's requested budget would not be subject to the city budget office's review. In response to a suggestion that came from the work session, the language was updated to clarify that council is not prohibited from seeking advice about the auditor's budget requests. Council would decide the merits of the auditor's budget request and modify accordingly. In evaluating the auditor's request, the proposed language suggests that council evaluates the auditor's budget based on the auditor's priorities and duties, rather than evaluating it as a bureau budget that must conform to the council's priorities for the executive branch. The proposal also includes the authority to carry over unused funds in compliance with state law. Although it varies from year to year, historical data indicate the carryover amounts would range from $100,000 to $200,000. Throughout the year, the Budget Office monitors how the Auditor's Office is using its appropriated funds and determines whether it must return money to the general fund. The ability to carry over funds is an extension of the principle that the City Budget Office, an entity we audit and investigate, should not be involved in the auditor's budget. Under the proposal, so long as the council appropriated funds are spent as intended for either personnel or materials and services, the auditor would retain unused dollars for those purposes the following year or place them in contingency. If funds in contingency are needed for purposes other than those originally agreed to, the auditor would be required by state law to return to council to request a change. And of course, council's budget setting authority operates as a check on how the auditor exercises the ability to carry over unused funds. That the auditor's office be independent from those it audits and investigates is fundamental to the credibility of our work. Taxpayers invest about $9 million in the accountability and transparency functions in my office. That investment should not be undermined by an inappropriate organizational structure, especially when it can so easily be fixed. This is an opportunity for the 6 elected officials to demonstrate to the public that the city is honest about its strengths and weaknesses and working hard to continuously improve. The amendments I prepared for your consideration address the greatest risks to independence, avoid duplication where possible, retain access to in-house expertise, and increase accountability across the board. This is a governance issue, and governance issues belong in charter. While the city code belongs to you, the charter is the people's document. This matter should be decided by voters in the May 2017 election. The time is ripe for asking voters to weigh in and have the ultimate say. We have generated considerable momentum, and the city has a history of referring important charter amendments to the May election, where voters tend to be well-informed because measures are less likely to be crowded out by more high-profile issues. More important, the cost of delay or inaction is too steep to ignore. The credibility of the auditor's office is at stake. Portlanders deserve an auditor's office that is beholden only to the cause of good governance. Mayor, I have 2 panels of invited guests to bring up, but I will defer to council if you want to continue discussing the amendments or. if
No,
you'd
please
like to-
continue.
I just have a question, or 2 questions actually. Is that all right?
Please.
Thank you. The proposed amendment says that there will be periodically external review. How often are you envisioning that there would be external review of the auditor's office?
I think that that would be based on need and based on priorities, given how much money I would have in any given year for those types of reviews.
That's not very reassuring. Anyway, the second question I have is there's appeal in the classified service now in the charter, there's the right of appeal to the Civil Service Board. And I understand that since the Civil Service Board is appointed by the mayor, that's not acceptable to you. Who are you thinking would be the outside appeal body when you set up the structure to be similar in the auditor's chapter?
We have talked about this on a limited basis with the Secretary of State's office, and the model they use is to have an administrative law judge. We also could have a panel similar to the Civil Service Board look at that. And I think there's some considerations, some legal considerations around that I'd like to pursue should this pass before we make a decision one way or the other. Those are the kinds of details that I was referencing that would have to be further researched and decided.
So then, though, once this leaves our desks and goes to the voters, we don't have any we're not involved in the administrative rules and the other implementation. The proposed change says specifically the auditor shall judge whether or not it's the right thing or not. So for the first set of administrative rules, because I'm very concerned about that ability for classified people who currently have the protections of the classified service, having similar protections in the office as you envision it. But you're not thinking of bringing back any of those details to council, right?
No, that would not be my thought today, but we would, based on the amendment that Commissioner Fish brought forward, we would be posting administrative rules to the public for public comment. And we also have some language in there that we will be consistent with city rules and regulations across the board so that the city as a whole is consistent. And I think that that's where some of your concerns would be assuaged.
And under our current system, when the Human Resources Director is redoing any administrative rules, all of the council get notified of that. I expect you do as well, and have the opportunity to comment. How would a citizen or a council member know that you were in the process of doing administrative rules?
Well, we have some administrative rulemaking capacity in our office now. For example, the hearings office has to provide 30 days notice, and the last time that the hearings officer changed the administrative rules for that office, we used the mailing lists of the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. In my office, we have a lot of mailing lists that go out to people, the council clerks, the ombudsman, and Independent Police Review and Audit Services. They have large mailing lists who they regularly communicate with. And so we would use all of those methods, certainly, as we do now. But there could be, if you have other suggestions, I'd be happy to
Well, I would
consider that.
certainly for this first set, like your commitment that you would let the council offices know that they're ready.
Oh,
for
certainly,
review.
certainly,
Thank you very
yeah.
much.
So if I may, Auditor, I just want to state the obvious. We have another time certain event that's supposed to happen in half an hour. I understand we have 27 people signed up so far for public testimony on this item. This is also a very important item, so I'd like to continue this. But I want to give the bad news to those of you that are here for the 3:30 time certain. I'm pretty much certain it isn't going to happen at 3:30. It will probably be closer to 4:30, and I apologize for that. But that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Madam Auditor, I have a question. We have put on the table a number of amendments, and I want to be sure as we continue the hearing that I'm clear as to which ones you support, which ones you don't support, and then I would hope that at the end of the hearing, after you've heard all the testimony, you could be invited back just to have a
Okay.
discussion with the council to see whether there are any other changes that you might consider. So, my amendment, based on a suggestion from the League of Women Voters, my understanding is you support that.
I do.
Okay, thank you. The mayor has proposed two changes relating to collective bargaining agreements. Do you support those?
I do.
Okay. Commissioner Saltzman has proposed taking the ombudsman out altogether. Your position on that?
I do not support that.
Okay. And Commissioner Fritz and you have reached agreement on a number of amendments, which is laudable. She has one amendment with an alternative and two other amendments. Do you support them or not at this point?
I have differing opinions on them. Would you like me to go down the list?
I'll tell you what, because we have people backed up, could we invite the auditor back at the end, Mayor?
Let's do that.
Have that
Let's,
conversation.
let's get to some of the tests. You said you had two invited panels. If
Yes.
we could be,
Can I just say,
And they will
Mayor,
be brief.
if there is an amendment, Madam Auditor, that you don't support now, that based on the testimony and further consideration, you have a alternate suggestion, I hope at the end of today, you can come back and share that with us, if there's a path to getting to some compromise.
So before you leave, I just want to make sure I understand, under your proposal, how your budget gets set. Is it the city council, the final
Yes.
decider on your budget?
Yes, that's your responsibility under state law.
Okay, so if you're given a 5% cut, just to choose a number, you understand that has to be, you have to come up with a budget that's 5% less than what it was the year before.
Correct.
Okay.
And it says that you have the obligation to modify or not modify that budget. That's your decision. I would put up a request and then you all would decide it.
So we're free to say you can't cut this, but you can cut that. Is that what I understand by saying that?
Well, I think that the way I would view that is that it would be my responsibility to make my best pitch for how I wanted to spend the money, and then it would be your decision about whether I had made my case or not. We have some leeway already existing today about applying resources differently so long as personnel services remain personnel services and materials and services remain materials and
Yeah,
services.
so I guess what I'm speaking to, there's a dynamic here. It's probably true in every government that when bureaus are asked to make cuts, they often offer up the things they think are the least acceptable to the governing body to cut. And so what I'm trying to ensure here is if you were to engage in that same practice, that we would be able to say, no, you can't cut that very popular program or that very important program, you have to cut over here. As long as it falls within the guidelines of personnel, materials, and services.
I believe that's correct. I don't think that it would be, so for example, there was a retirement and audit services, and I moved that position to create a deputy ombudsman. And so I think I have that authority now. I don't think I have the authority to say I will get rid of all the council clerks.
Right.
So
Okay.
I think is that what you're describing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
that's what I'm describing.
Yeah, okay. I will not get rid of all the council clerks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, I will quickly introduce the two panels. I have asked them to be very brief, and the first panel are former city auditors Jewel Lansing, Gary Blackmer, and Levon Griffin-Valade. And the second panel is Elliot Shuford, who is representing the Association of Local Government Auditors, and Dante James from who is the director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights.
I just want to say for the Guinness Book of World Records, I think this is the first time in council history we've had 4 current or former auditors in the same room. So it's quite an honor for this body.
colleagues, while the panel is coming up, I want to get a sense of you whether or not we could continue the next item, item 86, the Northeast Community Development Initiative 5-year plan. Could we continue that to tomorrow afternoon? Does that work?
I would prefer, Mayor, I think it's unlikely we're going to be finished with this matter until 5, and that includes a discussion by council, and I just hate to hold people waiting, particularly since people may have to pick up kids at school or get home or do other things. So whatever we do, I think it would be more respectful if we just set it over for tomorrow or some other time rather than keep people hostage.
I can
Would,
do tomorrow.
What time tomorrow?
2 p.m.?
I can't, but that's all right.
So
I can make that. yes.
you can make 2? Okay, I'm sorry about that, Commissioner Saltzman. Why don't we do that so that people don't have to stick around who are here for that item? So,
Kimberly, does that work?
okay, do I need a motion or anything on that, or can we just do it?
You can set it over without objection.
It's been set over till 2 p.m. tomorrow for those of you who are waiting for time certain item 86. Thank you, and I apologize for that. Sorry, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Blackmer, a resident of Portland and former Multnomah County, Portland, and Oregon State Auditor. It's truly an honor to be here with these other noteworthy city auditors, and Jewel Lansing especially deserves recognition. She set a course when she arrived in 1983 to improve Portland's services and ensure the best use of its public funds. We all followed in her footsteps on that same mission. Jewel Lansing created performance auditing in Portland and even in the Northwest, and knew the importance of a certification requirement for the city auditor and for professional audit standards for the office. For these reasons, the public has come to trust the work of the auditor. I believe you also trust the work of the auditor, and this proposed charter is expressing trust in her judgment and professionalism to carry out her administrative responsibilities. But working in this environment where the auditor is dependent upon bureaus while also auditing them can be troubling. I think a story is the best way to explain the challenges faced by an auditor in Portland. Before I was an auditor, I worked for a sergeant in the Planning and Research Unit of the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. He was a wise man with many years of patrol experience. He said that it was common for restaurants to offer free coffee to deputies, and he regularly stopped at one business in his district and accepted the free coffee. He said that one day he stopped a speeder, and it turned out to be the restaurant owner. The owner said to him, "After all that free coffee, you're not going to write me a ticket, are you?" The sergeant said he wrote the ticket, and he also regretted all that free coffee, and he never took another cup of free coffee. So what's the connection to the auditor? There are times when the auditor needs to work with a bureau on an administrative matter, like purchasing or hiring. If the bureau's rules don't make sense for the auditor's needs, should she accept the bad situation and struggle with the consequences, or should she ask for an exception? And if she asks the bureau director or the commissioner in charge for an exception, what has she lost in integrity if that exception is granted? Would she ever hear, "After we granted you that exception, you're not going to write a negative audit, are you?" And could her exception come back at her publicly? And even asking for an exception and having it denied, could that ever come back on her publicly? So these are things that go through the mind of an auditor and the bureau director, as Auditor Hal Caballero had explained. This is an example of what the audit standards call an independence issue, or what others would call the appearance of a conflict of interest. The public expects an unfettered auditor, but Portland offers few protections from these situations. Something in city code is not enough. This charter proposal allows Portland's auditor to have transparent, professional, working relationships in both administrative and auditor matters with other bureaus and with council. I urge you to support the Auditor's Office in its mission to improve Portland through audits, the Ombudsman, and IPR. The protections in the proposed charter change can only enhance the contributions that an auditor can make to the city, and they are long overdue. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jewel Lansing, former city auditor, as you've heard by now.
Thank you for being here.
I just want to take you back a little further, back to 67, when Multnomah County passed a home rule county charter. And in that charter, there's one little sentence that it says that there shall be an auditor who does regular audits. And the reason the charter actually passed is because the incumbent auditor, not George Schmitz, that was over here on this side.
Jake O'Donnell.
I beg your pardon?
Jake O'Donnell, I think.
Oh, yeah, Jack O'Donnell.
Uh-huh.
Jack O'Donnell. He was said to not know the difference between a ham on rye, and it appeared before council. Mainly, they went around and counted cash in the various offices, is what they did. But the way, when I went to the county, the way I was able to keep my head above water was that I had all this support from Don Clark. He said, tell them if they won't cooperate, you come to me. I'll see that they do. He was determined that that would be a worthwhile position and a worthwhile cause. It wasn't then until 1982, and the reason the change came in 1982 is because Mildred Schwab got elected, was on city council, and she's one of the most popular local government officials you'll ever find. And she took me on as her favorite project, and she was my independence, as Don Clark was at the county. Is that because Mildred was the one who would take my wishes to council, and she ran always supporting my office, and that otherwise it would have been a miserable time at the city, because as you know, it's a really high-pitched kind of environment that goes on there, and the auditor can help key that down. But that issue, the one of independence, and I heard you talking tonight also about the issue of, salaries was in there by now. Believe me, I got much less than the council members did at the city, and things have changed. But again, Don Clark, of course, as I say, was a very important person in the process. It was that there was an example there at the county that worked at the city, and it took a long time to get to the point that these amendments that are proposed get to the guts of the whole overview of how important the auditor is or is not in it. The reason the city council actually in 1982 voted to approve performance auditing is that there got to be letters to the editor from the public, and it got to be the point that it was an issue that the public would think you were trying to hide something, and that you wanted her things covered up. And when council approved that money, there was a picture on the front page of the Oregonian, believe it or not, showing Frank Ivancy over here. He won't even look at the rest. It won't look at me. And Mildred and Margaret Strawn and Charles Jordan are all there. So it was a big day, and we got a banner headline in the Oregonian. And thank goodness the Oregonian has always been supportive of the audit function, and that's an important part too. So I'm going to let Levon talk now.
I have a proposal that we call Mary back up here after I'm done with my little speech, and we'll sing a quartet, because there's four of us. Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, I'm Levon Griffin-Valade, former city auditor. I was recently at home, sitting in my office, minding my own business, and attempting to finish the draft of my first novel, when I received a request to weigh in on Auditor Hull Caballero's efforts to strengthen, or should I say fix, the structural deficits within the city charter that effectively impair the elected city auditor's independence. Like Jewel Lansing and Gary Blackmer, I'm also a former Multnomah County auditor. The three of us know a thing or two about the importance of a government accountability, transparency, and public stewardship. And we definitely know a thing or two about the added difficulty in achieving those goals at the City of Portland. That's among the reasons we support Auditor Hull Caballero's vision of the Office of City Auditor. I've read all of the documents provided by the Auditor's Office and viewed the recorded January 10th work session, 3 times actually. And here are 3 significant concepts that I want to pinpoint from Auditor Hol Caballero's statements that day. Independence is the cornerstone of credible oversight, and credible oversight is the cornerstone of good public sector governance. Regarding independence, the work of the Ombudsman and independent review divisions will have far more success in changing the systemic flaws they encounter if their authority is cemented in the charter language that guarantees the independence of their investigative function and purpose. And yes, I know the Independent Review Division is no longer included in this effort, and apparently the Ombudsman's office is threatened. But I believe both should be part of the charter change, and I'm deeply disappointed that IPR currently no longer is. Auditor Hol Caballero also suggested that it's time for the city to make a culture shift. To quote, historically, the auditor's office has been viewed as just another subordinate bureau rather than being treated as an elective office with separate and distinct responsibilities from the mayor and council. That means structural improvements are needed to make the auditor's office administratively independent from the executive branch and from the bureaucracy it oversees. So the third concept I want to pinpoint is I wholeheartedly agree that the city auditor should have the authority to hire outside counsel. The auditor's arm's length oversight role requires independence and objectivity and general good judgment. At times, the auditor might question the attorney's office assessment of what is best for Portland as an institution as opposed to what is best for the community or the overall long-term interests of the city. Such circumstances would benefit from guidance by outside legal counsel. Further, I would argue that the auditor should be granted the funding necessary to hire in-house counsel. Such legal advice is needed on many day-to-day administrative questions, particularly regarding IPR, the Ombudsman, audit services, and the hearings office, or other matters that potentially conflict with the efforts of individual bureaus and/or council members. And here's the thing, in my view, these are all changes the public deserves the right to consider. These are all changes the public might already want, even clamor for. These are also changes the public might reject. So what is the harm in simply allowing voters the right to decide whether or not these changes should be included in the city's charter? Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
I would just like to thank the panel and say that it is a thrill to have 4 of you in the room at the same time. And I want to also thank Ms. Lansing for the crash course in the first 150 years of Portland's politics. It came in handy.
I have one question, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
before we lose our panel. And one of the amendments proposes to change the qualifications of the office. And I don't think we've had a chance to hear from all 3 of you as to your view of that. So just as succinctly as possible, could each of you just comment on the amendment that we have on the table, which would change the qualifications for the office?
So I've heard this particular office compared to the Secretary of State's office, and the Secretary of State is a politician, is a party official, and has a, I believe, Gary can help me out here, a real arm's length relationship with the Audit Services Division. And I do believe that Jean Patrick is a certified auditor.
Oh,
And
no, she's not.
She's not, so that's not a requirement then there at all. Anyway, I think that the reason why that has become important to both the city and the county and Metro and also to Washington County's auditor is that there's a certain level of commitment to the traditions, not only the traditions, but the standards that are established by the GAO, and this is called the Yellow Book, and I think that was brought up at the work session, which establishes how audits should be performed and what level of independence the auditor should have, and that's a really important understanding and depth of knowledge for whoever's elected to the city auditor, or whoever is elected as Multnomah County Auditor or Metro Auditor. And that's a regional tradition that is highly respected and viewed very highly through the rest of the country.
Gary Blackmer again. The worst case scenario is someone who really has a political ambition and they get elected auditor and they start writing audits that attack your bureaus and then they run to be a commissioner or a mayor. That is one big risk, and that was one of the considerations that was in Jewel's mind when, I mean, she can correct me if I'm wrong, when she put that certification requirement in. But there was also the expectation that the auditor would be a professional and that it was a means of ensuring that greater credibility, which is one of the reasons why she introduced it in Multnomah County later when they asked her to come back temporarily to fill a position, and it was approved overwhelmingly by the voters. So there is an expectation that this is a person who is outside of the politics of the moment or their political career and working hard to do what they can as a professional to make government better. So that would be my quick.
And if we didn't do that, I mean, if we don't take that amendment, and we did take the amendment to have a set time frame for the periodic audits of the department, what would that time frame be in your recommendation?
So when you say the department, do you mean audit services or the entire?
Entire office, because
auditor's
obviously there's a
office?
smaller audits department we haven't really addressed here, but, you know, that if we don't have robust elections, which is how each of us gets really determined whether we deserve to continue or not.
Well, the same with the auditor.
Well, I can't remember the last time there was a contested race except for the open position when you won it. And so that's really not, doesn't give me a right concern that
Well,
that's going to
I
happen.
can-
So how, if we did put a number in instead of just periodic audits, what would the number be?
I could support that, but have not had that discussion with the auditor, Hol Caballero. As you can see, I wasn't even prepared to answer the question that Commissioner Fish asked, so I'm really not prepared to answer that one either.
It's been a scramble to figure out what's going on.
I guess there are so many diverse responsibilities in the auditor's office. It could be a relatively expensive review because if you wanted a review of IPR and the ombudsman and audit services and the hearings office and council clerk and, you aren't going to find experts that are going to be able to make concrete recommendations in all those areas because it would be 5 or 6 or 7 different reviews. So
And
I
audit-
think it's a challenge.
I'm sorry. Audit services must have a review every 3 years, peer review, and that's part of following government auditing standards. In order to meet those standards, you must
Are
have
those
that.
published?
Yes, they are. In fact, you
Yes.
could go to the auditor's Audit Services Division website and find them.
So then that happens on a routine. That's
On a
good.
routine
So all we'd be
basis.
looking for is auditing of the rest of the money and functioning.
I assume that is sort of the model that Mary had in mind.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to respond to your question. It's been troublesome question to me whether there should be these professional requirements because you do now have to be a certified individual, and that's not an easy haul to jump. It's a big requirement. The reason I support it is because I see what the alternative would be. And when I wasn't going to run for re-election and I heard who was going to run to fill my place, it just made my blood run cold because there are people who just wanted to get in, as Gary mentioned, that's an easy way to slip into government and then you're there, you can be there for life, really.
And I just want to say, Auditor Lansing, in light of what Commissioner Udaley said earlier, When I first ran, I read your book and outlined it. And the only difference is I sent you a copy of my outline and you sent it back with corrections.
This is true. This is a true
It's true.
story.
An auditor.
Thank you.
Let's read down.
Yeah, it does take a special sort of person, I think, to be an auditor. It's the introvert part, but also the willingness to sort of step back from your self-interest and your personal views on things. And I think that that is ingrained in us, not only through our personalities, but also through the fact that we follow government auditing standards.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can you read
Was
these?
there another panel? There's another panel, very good. Thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, members of the council. For the record, my name is Elliot Shuford. I'm here as a representative for the Association of Local Government Auditors. It's also known as ALGA. It's a professional organization of over 350 audit organizations throughout the United States and Canada.
Thank you.
We have followed the Portland City Auditor's efforts to strengthen the independence of the office and wish to express our support for the auditor's proposed charter amendment. An independent auditing function operating under professional audit standards plays a key role in effective governance and public accountability. Auditing helps ensure that citizens and elected officials can have confidence that scarce resources are protected by strong management controls and practices. The proposed charter amendment aims to ensure independence for the auditor in several ways. First, budget. ALGA's model legislation states that an auditor's budget should be submitted directly to the City Council. This aims to reduce the threat to the auditor's independence, such as potential management interference through control or manipulation of the auditor's budget. In Portland, the auditor submits the budget through a city bureau, and that's a situation that the charter amendment rightly seeks to rectify. Independence is critical because auditors may be called upon to issue reports that critique the efficiency or the effectiveness of management's programs. If auditors are not independent in areas such as budget, they may encounter pressure to avoid certain topics or to omit or change information in a report that's critical of a program. Such pressures can be particularly acute in situations where auditors must seek permission or approval for certain administrative functions from a department or a bureau that is also being audited. The proposed charter amendment would also ensure the auditor greater independence in other areas, including human resource management, procurement, and legal advice. Greater independence in these areas would assure both you, as well as the public, that the auditor's reports are objective, fair, and complete. We understand there may be interest in strengthening the auditor's independence through changes to Portland's code rather than amending the charter. While that option may appeal to some, it does not provide the same guarantee of structural independence for the auditor's office. Instead, we support the use of the charter amendment process to protect the independence of your city auditor and encourage you to pass a resolution toward that end. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
My pleasure. First time this year, so Happy New Year. I've been invited to speak just on the narrow aspect of the issue of my office, the Office of Equity and Human Rights. My name is Dante James, and its relationship with the Auditor's Office, and whether there's any particular concern about a loss of relationship, a loss of authority, a loss of oversight or engagement that my office may have with the Auditor's Office. And the short answer is that I've had the pleasure of working both with the present auditor and the previous auditor, more often than not at their engagement, reaching out to my office. And also with IPR, with the Ombudsman, have been able to work collaboratively and testify here in support of several of the issues that the auditors brought forward, or Ombudsman brought forward last year. So essentially, my office has no more authority over the auditor than I have over you. And so it's a relationship based on mutual trust and respect, as well as sometimes using my bully pulpit. And so I don't find any negative in terms of the relationship that my office will have should this move forward and be referred. So that's kind of the short answer with this. And also, just as an FYI, or when I was working in Denver, I worked for the mayor of Denver. Before he was the mayor of Denver, I worked for him when he was the auditor. So there is no expectation or requirement for any certification, and it is very much a political office and has been a stepping stone from the auditor's office to the mayor's office for several, probably in the last 25 years. So, for what that's worth.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion?
A little bit of both. I mean, I've seen the office used sometimes as a political sword, but I've also seen the good work of the audits that are done, but it truly creates a political theater sometimes that plays out that isn't necessarily good for the outcomes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. Appreciate it. So with the forbearance of my colleagues, we can start with the public testimony. How many people do we currently have signed up?
27.
All right, why don't we go ahead and start with that, please?
The first three, please come on up, are Sherry Solomon, Stephen Solomon, and Daniel Solomon. And they'll be followed by Peter Kwong.
Could I make a request that, just given that we are way over schedule, could we limit testimony to 2 minutes? And I realize that puts the burden on the people who go first, and I apologize for that, so I won't be draconian about it.
Mayor, can I just make an observation?
Yeah, please.
We have 6 or 7 amendments on the table in addition to the referral, and we're in a very compact time frame to make a decision. So I would urge us to err on the side of giving people time to the extent they are talking about the amendments as well as the main motion.
That would be fine. My concern is I think we may lose our quorum at 4:30. I know I will have to leave. I know Commissioner Fritz already has an excused absence at 4:30. I don't know where we are with the others. The alternative is we could do the 3 minutes with the understanding that we're probably not going to get through it all today. Unless, I mean, it seems we probably want the full city council here. Well, why don't we do this? Let's start with 3 minutes and then let's see where we go. Let's see where we go. And if you could just state your name for the record and off to the races.
Hi, my name is Steve Salomon. I'm from Goose Hollow.
Thank you, sir.
My family is here today to ask for the city council to send the auditor's proposal to the voters. We believe it's crucial for the ombudsman's office to stay with the auditor's office and have more independence than it has now, especially since Mayor Hales made threats to the auditor's budget when he didn't like auditors' reports or the ombudsman's findings. Send this to voters to give more transparency, more ethical treatment, and fewer political power plays over an office that should be independent. The auditor and ombudsman have been very important to West Side neighborhoods where we live. The ombudsman responded to an anonymous complaint about huge financial conflicts of interest with West Quadrant Stakeholders Advisory Committee members. The West Quadrant Plan is the basis for the Central City 2035 plan that you'll be voting on. Her report found that there were enormous financial conflicts of interest by these members who promoted their own financial interests and advocated for increased heights and relaxed zoning on their own properties or properties they had financial connections to. Residents who attended West Quadrant meetings repeatedly told staff their concerns that they saw ridiculous financial conflicts during the West Quadrant process. Planning Bureau staff scornfully dismissed these concerns. This is what they scornfully dismissed. A developer on the Stakeholders Advisory Committee sent emails to staff saying, hey, you forgot to raise heights on these blocks, which lo and behold turned out to be their properties. a current planning commission member who was on that stakeholder advisory committee, had many years of paid work trying to get parking structures at Southwest 10th and Morrison redeveloped, yet still advocated for that redevelopment to be made a West Quadrant priority and claimed it was not a conflict. A developer who owns many properties in Goose Hollow advocated to remove the required residential overlay, relax zoning, and raise heights in Goose Hollow. Unsurprisingly, all of those things will dramatically increase his property values. Staff told concerned residents that these were not conflicts.
We've heard estimates that the West
I'm,
Quadrant.
really sorry to interrupt. Could you just state your name for the record?
Sherry
I
Salomon.
apologize. Thank you.
We've heard estimates that West Quadrant developments that will receive increased heights and relaxed zoning in favor of those conflicted SAC members if you approve the Central City plan, 2035 plan will gain $50 to $100 million in profit from those policies. There is a lot of money at stake. Several city council members have received substantial donations from the same people who were named as having financial conflicts. Planning staff, SAC members, and the Planning Commission ignored the Ombudsman's requirement that SAC members must disclose their financial conflicts. The Planning Commission voted to give increased heights and relaxed zoning to those conflicted SAC members even after hearing overwhelming testimony about residents' outrage, of which the three of us also testified, I might add. Our family testified at the Planning Commission. We were stunned to see that the deck was already stacked. It didn't matter that a third of the testimony was against these conflicts. The commission ignored the outpouring of public testimony and voted to give conflicted SAC members millions of dollars in benefits from serving on an SAC and steering policy their way. We are so grateful for the Ombudsman's office efforts to try to fix this, but we see that the Auditor's Office should have independence and the ability to require enforcement, since city staff and the Planning Commission completely ignored the Ombudsman's requirements. Within months of the Ombudsman reports, Mayor Hales was threatening to reduce the auditor's budget. People named as having conflicts donated to his campaign. This does not look good for democracy. We are very concerned that Commissioner Saltzman is, and apparently, one who suggested removing the Ombudsman's office from the vote to make the auditor independent. You may not know this if you do not read the Northwest Examiner, but Commissioner Saltzman owns many properties in the West Quadrant, but did not recuse himself from voting to approve the West Quadrant plan, which increased the values of his very own properties by raising heights and relaxing zoning. This surely violates ethics law. It may even be illegal, but also makes us question why he is pushing to give the Ombudsman's office less independence. Daniel, your turn.
Okay,
Name for the record, please. Thank you.
my name is Daniel Salomon, and I live in Goose Hollow.
Thank you.
We also appreciate the auditor's report on the problems with the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. We agree with the auditor that any business association or nonprofit receiving city funds to promote community engagement should have oversight and ethical obligations. We have seen a business association begin in our neighborhood, which is almost fully funded by our tax dollars through Venture Portland, and claims to represent neighborhood businesses. But in reality, it appears to be a puppet organization for one of the developers the Ombudsman identified as having a conflict on the West Quadrant SAC, S-A-C. This organization functions almost completely with our tax dollars, but has no obligation to have open meetings, open records, elections, or conflict of interest obligations for board members. They sent letters to the cities taking a stand on land use and other policy issues without ever having a meeting with their membership or board to vote on what stand they will take. This should not be funded by our tax dollars. If they want to go to the trouble of creating a puppet organization which speaks for the financial interests of only a couple of powerful people, they should do it on their own dime. The auditor's ONI audit points out these exact issues with nonprofits funded through ONI and with business associations. We hope the auditor audits Venture Portland and the Planning Commission next. We're telling you these stories so you know how much the auditor's office, including the ombudsman's office, needs independence, free from political power plays and free from the influence of powerful political donors. You can see how much independence is needed by the fact that it took an anonymous complaint to the ombudsman to get anyone in the city to care about flagrant financial conflicts of interest on the West Quadrant plan. Portland residents deserve to know that the auditor's office and the ombudsman's office can be independent of such political processes. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Just as a point of clarification, the Office of Neighbourhood Involvement doesn't do anything with business associations. That goes to the Portland Development Commission. So there was a kind of a misunderstanding in the audit. So thank you for your testimony.
Oh, you're welcome.
Mayor, just, if I could also just note that, because you raised the question, we agree that based on the Ombudsman's report, that we need to change the rules applicable to boards and commissions. As you know, historically, people were not required to fill out a disclosure form. There was no training. There were no uniform bylaws. There was no master database at the city of people who serve. We're in the process of bringing forth a package of reforms that draw from the Ombudsman's report, which will address a number of those things. So separate and apart from what we do with the independence of the auditor, those issues are being taken seriously, and we will, in the near future, have a hearing on changes to how we do boards and commissions to address the very issues you raised in your testimony. So I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Testimony. The next three, please. And again, if people could just state their name for the record, that'd be helpful.
Next three are Peter Kwong, Chris Broderick, and Michael Mahaffey, and they'll be followed by Wendy Rom, Chris Nielsen, and Tim Helzer.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Peter Kwong. I'm a certified public accountant and an audit shareholder of the Portland accounting firm Perkins & Company. The views that I will be stating today are those of my own and not necessarily those of Perkins & Company. I have audited privately held and publicly traded companies for over 20 years. A little over a year ago, I was asked to join the City Auditor's Advisory Council, and during that time, I've gained substantial knowledge about the elected city auditor and auditor's office and what their roles and responsibilities are for the City of Portland. In my experience as an auditor, the City of Portland is in some ways like a publicly traded company. Shareholders in publicly traded companies are individuals and investors who rely upon the statements made by management and their independent auditors. In all publicly traded companies, an internal audit function exists outside of the company's operational management. Generally, the largest blue chip public companies have internal audit functions that are fully independent of management. In large companies, the board of directors or audit committee sets the budget for both external and internal auditors to ensure that the information reported to the public and investors is materially accurate. That independence is crucial to the credibility of the auditor's work. The shareholders and the public depend on those audits. So why would this be pertinent to the City of Portland? If the public views City Council as a board of directors, similar to a publicly traded company, it would need to ensure that the information the auditor's office presents to the public is non-biased and materially accurate without any undue influence from the city departments, including the offices of budget and management and finance, that the city auditor and her office are responsible for auditing. The advice and work of the city attorney's office, which represents city departments being audited, should also be kept separate from the city auditor, with the auditor being able to obtain legal advice from independent counsel. Whether we work in a company or in a city, auditors should be able to report critical findings and have the budget and support they need, especially when audits uncover findings that are critical of management. It is also important to have an elected auditor in office whose licensed or certified professionals uphold the following principles: integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and competency, and that they have the means to do so without undue influence from others, especially from those that they audit and investigate. In my opinion, by updating and aligning the city charter to be consistent with roles and responsibilities of the auditor, will help preserve the independence and integrity of this office and the city government it audits and investigates. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Broderick. I'm also a member of the Auditor's Citizen Advisory Committee. I am a Associate Vice President of Portland State University and a former journalist at the Oregonian who has a special interest in government accountability. Our committee believes strongly that an independent auditor's office is crucial to being professional and impartial, to provide rather professional and impartial oversight to evaluate city operations from police to parks to public housing. An independent auditor helps you as the mayor and the city council to recommend improvements that move our community forward. The functions of the auditor's office have not been updated in the city charter for more than 2 decades, and since then, as you've heard, the responsibilities have expanded greatly, such as the creation of the ombudsman. We feel in the committee that it is important to put the ombudsman in the city charter instead of a city code, because it does not only enshrines it into the charter, but it ensures that any changes from then on will have to be made by the voters and not by 3 votes of the city council. The office should be independent from the agencies that are subject to auditor oversight. You heard that clearly from the former auditors. An independent auditor is not just the best practice, but a common practice among cities with elected auditors. An example is the budget. Under the current system, the city budget office oversees the auditor's budget, and that arrangement, I think, can shape the spending priorities of the auditor, what the auditor does or does not do. So to me, it's difficult to have an independent auditor without an independent budget process. And as for oversight, the auditor still would report to the city council and ultimately to the voters. An independent auditor enhances the credibility of Portland city government. As you know, there are past examples when the city lost credibility with the public, such as how police handled the mentally ill or the parking meter bribe scandal. An independent auditor's office grounded the city charter would boost public confidence in the ability of city government to hold itself accountable. That all said, some of you still have concerns about this proposal, and ultimately, however, I think it makes sense to let the voters weigh the pros and cons of this to decide for themselves if this is a good idea. In that way, the burden of persuasion is on the auditor as an elected official to prove to the voters that this is a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. I'm Michael Mahaffey. I'm president of the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association, and I submitted written remarks to you by letter, but I'd like to summarize those in oral testimony as well. And as I noted in the written remarks, the board of Goose Hollow Foothills League has unanimously voted to support the auditor's proposal. We strongly concur with the need to secure independent legal advice, create an independent budget process, and affirm the independent operations of the office, free from the fact or the appearance of undue political influence. We also strongly concur that these reforms should be embodied in a charter amendment approved by the voters, free of potential for changes by the council members who also serve as bureau executives. The issue of ethics in city government was an important campaign issue in last year's election, as you know, and rightly so, we believe. We've all seen recent evidence of disturbing lapses in ethical transparency and accountability. For example, as was alluded to earlier, the West Quadrant of Central City Neighborhoods has much to be grateful for in the work of the Ombudsman's report of 2015, finding undisclosed potential conflicts of interest in the West Quadrant Plan Stakeholder Advisory Committee process, and I appreciate the efforts to deal with that process more thoroughly. We believe the last city election has provided a clear mandate to restore public confidence in the integrity of that system. And we also want to thank the auditor for making us aware of a number of issues in the recent review of Portland's Neighborhood Involvement Administration. And we believe this and other recent events point to a very important need for really thorough structural reforms leading to greater subsidiarity, transparency, and representative democracy in Portland's neighborhood involvement system. And we look forward to working with the council to address this need. And finally, may I add on a personal note, not speaking here for the board, that I really appreciate Commissioner Fritz's sharing her concerns with us about employment issues in this proposal and other aspects of that. And I hope that these issues can be addressed and this important initiative can go forward with everyone's support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next three are Wendy Rom, Chris Nielsen, and Tim Helzer. And they'll be followed by Debbie Iona, Carol Cushman, and Dan Handelman.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Wendy Rom. I hope to explain why I think it's so important for you to approve the auditor's proposal, all of it, including incorporating it into charter and putting it to a May vote. After 27 years of test driving the current system, the flaws are known. A prominent lawyer, past auditors of Portland and of the state of Oregon and even of another major city endorsed the proposal at the earlier work session as best practices. They all testified that the auditor's office, including the ombudsman, must have complete independence from political pressure, both in appearance and in fact. Any scent of political pressure on an audit or ombudsman process can distort the results and the public's confidence in those results. And that is where we are in Portland, with the public questioning results because of shaky processes, with some, at least, appearances, if not fact, of having been subjected to political pressures. In fact, the auditor is obliged to seek autonomy by GAO guidelines called Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, which specifically requires an auditor to address threats to an auditor's independence. Our auditor is responding to this higher standard. An auditor should be able to hire independent legal counsel and not be obliged to use the city attorney who is hired by city council. An auditor should be able to have some control of that office's budget without first having to get approval from another city bureau also competing for dollars and which is hired by city council. An auditor should be able to make Did it go off? No. An auditor should be able to make management decisions independent of other city bureaus which are hired by city council. Checks on the auditor exist. First, the auditor is an elected official. Also, the auditor is required to follow all HR rules outlined in federal law. And city council may play a part in contracting an independent professional audit review agency to review the auditor's office, and those results would be made public. I hope my testimony helps to lead you to do the right thing, ensure that effective checks and balances in our government are in our charter. Please vote to put this entire proposal to the voters. Thank you for letting me speak.
Wendy, just one clarification.
Yeah.
It's the auditor who would be asking for the audit of that office, not.
But my understanding is that, in fact, that proposal would be contracted, or the funding would be approved by you as well.
I don't believe so, but.
No? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Chris Nielsen. I'm here to speak to you today in support of the auditor's request to the City Council to refer to the voters of the City of Portland amendments to the city charter to protect the auditor's independence. Portland is the city that works. Yet, in the 2016 community survey reported in November 2016, rankings of Portland as a livable city and city government's overall delivery of services have declined by double digits since 2012. Performance audits conducted by the City Auditor's Office of City Bureaus and complaints invested by the Ombudsman are two ways that the performance of the city can be analyzed and improved, and that citizens such as myself can have confidence that our city government is doing the best possible job with the resources it has. My confidence is built on both the reality and the appearance of the auditor's independence, including the work of the Ombudsman, which the auditor's budget supports. The auditor works for me, just as all of you do, and for the people in this room and the people outside these doors. I would like the auditor to have both actual independence and the appearance of independence. That's the backbone of the auditor's credibility. I ask you as the City Council to give me the opportunity to vote on the charter changes that would make that so. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there's one more, sorry. Yes, sir.
Mayor, members of the council, My name is Tim Helzer. I'm a resident of Hayden Island. I've been a resident of Portland since 1946. Our economically diverse residential and commercial community on Hayden Island is home to approximately 3,000 full-time residents and many retail and recreational interests. We are near major rail, barge, air, deep water marine, and interstate highway systems, making it very attractive for industrial development. The area is also a fragile, primarily marine-based ecological region with several thousand acres of urban wildlife habitat for a wide variety of birds, mammals, riparian creatures, fish, specialized forests, and other species assets. Portland City Council has sponsored as major investment partner the development of huge projects that would have had high economic, environmental, transit, and social impact on a major portion of Hayden Island and the city. Here are 3 of at least 17 such projects that would have impacted very directly the citizens and the creatures of Hayden Island. First, the City Council was a major supporter of a several billion-dollar investment in the Columbia River Crossing Replacement Bridge, 22 lanes going across Hayden Island, massive environmental impact, and other consequences, with little direct oversight by the city's auditor's office. More than $100 million in engineering and other costs became totally unaccounted for, whereas an independent financial fraud investigation auditor identified this massive ripoff and blew the whistle on it to the Washington State Senate. Project canceled. Next, a sprawling marine-based industrial complex was grandly proposed and aggressively promoted by the Port of Portland to Portland City Council on the 825 acres of West Hayden Island, for which there was never any proven economic need. $200 million would have gone down the drain, destroying 300 acres of natural wildlife habitat and endangering another 500. Little in-depth oversight by the city auditor's office was provided to you to avoid that kind of train wreck. Last, you are all very familiar with the Pembina propane storage and transfer operation that the city was very interested in, promoted by by Port of Portland again. It would have employed 3 full-time people, and yet it would have exposed this city to one of the most tragic and destructive explosions ever known across any part of the United States. You have a team member in the city auditor's office that needs to be more independent, needs to be better supported financially to serve you and serve us more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
The next 3 are Debbie Iona, Carol Cushman, and Dan Handelman, and they'll be followed by Robert Wright, Chris Broderick, and Bob Tackett.
Good afternoon.
She needs to go first.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League supports the goal of Auditor Hull Caballero's proposal for administrative independence, but believes accountability safeguards need to be added. Because this is a charter amendment, there should be a very high bar for referral. We recommend that a requirement for a clear and open process for crafting the rules needed to exercise the new administrative powers be added to the charter amendment. Furthermore, those rules should be subject to a periodic review process. In our accompanying memo, we provide details and the rationale for our recommendation to add a provision G to the administrative powers section. Provision G would require administrative rulemaking procedures for developing the rules and regulations implementing those powers. Of particular importance to the League is that administrative rulemaking requires public and stakeholder participation and input. In addition to using administrative rulemaking, at least once during an auditor's 4-year term, an ad hoc review committee, including stakeholders such as employees and interested members of the public, should review those administrative rules to identify possible improvements. The committee should also review the rules that govern the timeline, selection, and other elements of the auditor's use of outside expert reviewers. The League's Provision G recommendations also address the Oregonian editorial board's concern that, quote, increased autonomy, however, should not translate into a pass from accountability, end quote. The League fully supports providing administrative independence, but accountable use of that independence is a must. The initial rulemaking and periodic review we recommend will require capacity beyond what currently is available in the auditor's office. With that in mind, the League recommends that the auditor include in her upcoming budget the resources needed to conduct the initial administrative rulemaking. And I just want to draw your attention to this one-page thing with where we're recommending on section 2506A under administrative authority that you delete policies and practices, because that might be a way to get around the requirement for public participation in rulemaking. And then we've got, Commissioner Fish's office sent us a copy of the proposed amendment, which is fine with us, but we also really think it's important to have that last sentence that we have in section G that requires that every 4 year, having an ad hoc committee look at the rules just to see, if there's any room for improvement, and also be a good exercise for if an auditor changes every 4 years for the new auditor to become more familiar and have a good discussion about the rules that govern the way the office works.
Debbie, I'm hearing a sense that we may lose a quorum later, which may prevent us from acting today.
Yeah.
Therefore, it may go to next week if that's the case. If that does happen, I commit to sit down with you on the language you've proposed, you've given us, and the amendment that I've crafted to see how we can harmonize them.
Sounds great, and then I'm done. Thank you.
And I would second that as well, so that their amendment is on the table as well.
Very good. So Commissioner Fish will work with you, and I will second. It sounds like you're already seconding as an amendment what we will call the League of Women Voters Amendment, and we will add this to the pile along with the others for further discussion. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Carol Cushman, also representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. And we have 3 additional issues that we would like to address, but we wanted to give it full time to our proposed amendment. The auditor pays into the general overhead fund using an allocation process that also applies to city bureaus. Given the new administrative powers proposed in the charter amendment, several centralized services that the auditor is paying for would be used to a lesser extent. Instead, the auditor would be paying outside entities for these services. We recommend adding a provision to the resolution clarifying that the charter is committed to a future evaluation and adjustment of the general overhead fund model regarding the auditor. So not that you would worry about the money now, but let's not be double paying for some services. The League supports retaining the educational credentials for the auditor candidates. The educational credentials requirement was adopted in a 1986 charter amendment referral with an 80% yes vote. Auditors receive training and agree to abide by professional guidelines for conducting their work, which are valuable attributes for this position. Finally, the League is pleased the independent police review was removed from the proposal. We support including a civilian review board focused on police accountability in the charter, but recommend creating a separate process to explore how best to accomplish that goal. In our view, a targeted task force made up of members selected by the mayor and auditor with an understanding of our existing system should be formed within the next 2 years
and charged with developing a recommendation. A future charter commission would not be well-suited for the task, as charter commission members are selected by city council without auditor involvement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and council. This is the first time I've been part of this body. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and you will definitely be seeing me again. There's been a lot of discussion about whether people are for or against the charter amendment being proposed, and I think that too many people fixate on for or against because there are details that are really important, and that's what auditors, we count on auditors to be very exacting about those kinds of details. I challenge anybody in this room right now to tell me what we're considering right now as a charter amendment, because there's so many amendments floating around. There was stuff that was introduced today that I never saw before, and people prepared testimony on what was already presented to us. This is our Constitution. What's the rush here? Why do we have to have it on this May ballot? Let's get this right. Let's have a longer discussion. We actually agree with Commissioner Saltzman that the Ombudsman's Office shouldn't go in the charter amendments being made now. However, we agree that it should also be in the charter, that we proposed this in the last two charter commissions that came up in 2007 and 2011, that the Ombudsman, a police review agency not necessarily called IPR, and the Human Rights Commission, actually, we think all should be in the charter, as they're very crucial, and they also come at odds with the city attorney's advice, and they all need the independence that's being talked about today. So we want to make sure that people understand we're not opposed to the city auditor having more independence or getting independent legal counsel. We just think this is being rushed unnecessarily, and for whatever discussion's been happening out in the community, and to the extent that the auditor is listening to people, and we appreciate the IPR being taken out of here, it's just happening too fast. So I also want to add that the Ombudsman, one of the problems with the Ombudsman's office, the way it exists now, is I personally had a problem with an elected auditor and an IPR director, tried to file a complaint, and they said, first of all, they can't take a complaint against an elected official, and second of all, they wouldn't take a complaint against their own boss or somebody else in their office. And so as long as the IPR and Ombudsman are in the same place, how do you file a complaint about the IPR? These are things that need to be considered before we put the Ombudsman's office in the charter. And that's not even written into the ordinance that says they're not supposed to investigate other parts of the auditor's office. It's just a practice that happens. It is, again, we very much appreciate having an independent counsel be part of this. This is something that was recommended by the stakeholder group about IPR. This has the hallmarks of what happened with the proposals to change IPR, where things happen behind closed doors and too fast for the community to really be involved in it. We also think the outside contracts to review the auditor's office should have a set number of years, probably 2 or 3 years, and not any longer than that. And we'll try to send in some more written comments based on what was added today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Next three are Robert Wright, Chris Broderick, and Bob Tackett. And they'll be followed by Tracy Prince, John Calvin, and Rehana Ansari. Robert Wright, Chris Broderick, and Bob Tackett. Okay, let's go ahead and go with Tracy Prince and John Calvin. And Rehana. Mr. Light, oh, there's Rehana, sorry, thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Robert Wright. I live in the West End and I'm a proud Portland native. After a 27-year career in the United States Air Force and seeing much of the world, I returned to the best place on earth. In the Air Force, I shouldered the responsibility of command 4 times. Certainly, military and civil organizations are not the same, but they hold something very much in common: the need for independent, unfettered investigation and reporting outside the influence and pressures of the chain of command. At the highest levels in the military organization, there was the Office of the Inspector General, the IG, a feared organization if you were on the operational side of the military. Investigations helped ensure that taxpayer money was spent legally and efficiently. that graft and corruption did not exist, and that people were treated fairly with equal opportunity for all service members. Of course, commanders had these same fundamental responsibilities. But for the IG, it was there just to make sure. The directly elected city auditor is essentially the IG for the city council and the citizens of Portland to ensure unbiased planning and execution of programs in the best interests of the city. Auditor responsibilities for this elected position are on par with commissioners. The office should not be buried within city government bureaucracy. This has the appearance of being vulnerable to bias pressures from the very offices and bureaus and their programs subject to investigation. But this may be more than just appearance. During the last year, the Ombudsman in the Auditor's Office reported serious conflicts of interest and violation of long-established ethics requirements in the development of the Central City 2035 plan for the West Quadrant. Some that had served on an advisory committee simply refused to comply with the report's recommendations for full disclosure of financial interests. With no city follow-up, this is much more than just troublesome. To ensure the freedom of action and independence in operations and budgeting, the auditor must report directly to the City Council. This amendment to the city charter must be put before the voters in this upcoming May ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Tracy Prince. I've termed out as president of Goose Hollow. I'm now vice president. Goose Hollow supports the auditor's proposal for removing the office to be independent. We also vehemently object to removing the ombudsman from that process. We want the ombudsman to be independent. We want it codified in charter so that it can't be overturned by city council. I was not at the work session, but I have had a chance to read Commissioner Fritz's concerns. I have so much respect for her and for what she has done for my neighborhood and our city. She is often the commissioner who catches the small details with big implications. So I hope that her concerns can be addressed so that this can go to the May ballot. Please wait 1 week to give time to process this. I think it'll be a much stronger package if it goes to the voters with Commissioner Fritz's endorsement, since the voters know that she cares quite clearly about ethical governance. Goose Hollow, perhaps more than any other neighborhood, can tell you why the auditor and the ombudsman's independence is important. We've seen questionable behavior, like PBOT staff stacking the Central City Stakeholder Advisory Committee with the 3 companies who own the most parking spaces in downtown, who then voted to deregulate parking. We know that the outrageous financial conflicts of interest we saw on the West Quadrant Plan Stakeholder Advisory Committee were scoffed at by Planning Bureau staff and would never have been brought to the light of day without the ombudsman. After the ombudsman brought them to the light of day, this was quickly followed by threats from the mayor for the auditor. We know that at every level of Portland government, residents are not considered significant stakeholders, while developers and those who stand to gain financially are the most esteemed stakeholders. This leads to giant ethical problems across all bureaus. We need robust and independent oversight. The Ombudsman's office should have the same independence the auditor seeks. The ability to hire separate legal counsel is an important issue for both the auditor and the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman undoubtedly received legal advice from city attorneys on the West Quadrant SAC process, requiring that SAC members should have disclosed their financial obligations before the Central City 2035 plan went to the Planning Commission. Yet Planning Bureau staff sought legal advice from the same city attorneys who told them that disclosure by conflicted SAC members wasn't necessary before going to the Planning Commission as they voted on Central City 2035. Their argument was that no vote by the commission can be overturned in court, so therefore it's not necessary. Shockingly, this is actually true. It can't be overturned under current ethics laws, which I hope to change. Let me quickly go through this because it has to do with why the legal thing.
I ask you to be very quick because you're at your 3 minutes.
Yep.
We've got lots of people waiting.
So the ombudsman should have the ability to seek its own legal counsel separate from the city, and that is why I think they should be independent as well. And we deserve to have that independent oversight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. I'm Raihana Ansari, Government Relations Manager for the Portland Business Alliance. The proposed amendments before you today represent an opportunity for an important community conversation. We believe that voters should have the opportunity to review the merits of this proposal, and we therefore support referring the proposed charter changes to the voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That was the most succinct testimony I've heard in years, so thank you.
I can't say my name that quickly.
Next three are Lightning, Mark Velke, and Charles Bridgecrane Johnson. And they will be followed by Shirley Rackner. I believe the first name is Bora Harris, and Roger Leachman.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Charles Bridgecrane Johnson, and we haven't talked enough about the dreaded asterisk. But you did this morning have a lot of input from Joe Walsh, who will often say, "Emergency, emergency," because when we expedite things, we call them emergencies here. So I think it would actually be good to actually have the city attorney or yourselves inform the people of the exact date, the last date this could possibly be referred onto the May ballot if it passed as an emergency, so that we have an idea of the time frame. Some people have said we can even wait beyond May, but the League of Women Voters has offered a lot, and I'm in favor of, I think, getting it on the charter as soon as possible. There's really so much on the table that we need to open up some space for vigorous discussion. I'm sorry that Commissioner Fish had to step out, because I think what he meant to say was when he has the discussion with the LWV, we want to make sure that also Ms. Hull Caballero or somebody from her office can also be in a dynamic conversation, because of course we're talking about the balance of power between the auditor's office and y'all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to let you know my opinions on this subject today. My name is Mark Velke. I live in the Goose Hollow area, and I am a board member on the Goose Hollow Foothills League Neighborhood Association, and we voted unanimously to support the Auditor's Office and City Ombudsman request today. We represent about 6,500 citizens. However, these are my own opinions, and they just happen to match those of my neighborhood association. First, I would like to praise the Auditor's Office and the City Ombudsman for the great work they are doing. Two recent examples of that are the report on the Office of Neighborhood Involvement and the West Quadrant Plan Stakeholder Advisory Committee report on, frankly, incredible ethics violations. Keep up the fantastic work. So to continue to do that and even more, they need City Council's support today. And let's talk about what the Auditor's Office and City Ombudsman are asking you to do. Okay, this is a complete no-brainer. This has to be one of the easiest votes you will ever cast. It really boils down to this: are you for more transparency and accountability, or are you against it? Okay, I would hope that every one of you are for more transparency and accountability. So, do the right thing and refer to all of us here, the citizens and voters, so we can pass it by a landslide for inclusion in the city charter. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to address Mr. Johnson's question.
Thank you.
This needs to be decided prior to Thursday, February 2nd, to be referred to the May ballot.
And that's if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, we need even less.
It's a resolution, it's not an ordinance. So
Darn,
that-
thanks.
Thank you both.
The next three are Shirley Rackner, Bora Harris, and Roger Leachman. And they'll be followed by Suzanne Leonard, Kasia Rutledge, or Mark Kramer, and Deanna Mueller-Crispin.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Shirley Rackner. I live in Southwest Portland. I was on my way to Washington, D.C. last Thursday to join 1 million other Americans in support of all that we value and honor in our democracy. Knowing it was going to be a long trip, I had taken a local newspaper to read, And the first article I read was concerning the auditor's office. I admit the extent of my knowledge about the auditor's office is that I had voted for someone to do this important job. I must say that this afternoon I've learned more about the office. The further I read, I realized that this issue was complex. This afternoon I realized how complex, and that the commissioners might have concerns on the question of independence for the auditor's office. That was somewhat understandable. What was not understandable as I read was why not give the residents of Portland a voice on this and allow them to look at the question and vote one way or another. To further understand the issue, I found that the current structure of the elected auditor's office could be second-guessed by the commissioners and other unelected city offices, which is rather confusing since the definition of an audit is, I quote, an official inspection by individuals of organizations, typically by an independent body led by a CPA. That seemed very simple to me. It's also my understanding, like you, the auditor is democratically elected and should be independent. I ask the question, what makes this so difficult for this council to give the voters the opportunity to democratically decide on this question? And I must say, the irony did not escape me as I was flying to a People's March asking for a voice in our government. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I can just picture you going to that march. When it's referred to the ballot, it's either yes or no. So as you've heard earlier, it's not whether to send it to the ballot, it's exactly what are we going to send to you, the voters, for a yes or no. So it's very important that we get the details right. I'd also say that I think if the council had the ability to influence the auditor too much now, that certainly has not shown up in the audits that I've had and each one of my colleagues has had. So I'm astonished that people think that I had anything to do with that.
Good afternoon. The podium has already been addressed. I'm Deborah Harris, AKA Bora. My presence is not personal, but about what is honest, what is fair, what is ethical, and what should be real transparency. Studying the organizational structure, I support and appreciate the need for change and see much value placing the Office of Ombudsman into charter. I began to reflect on the current and past state of police accountability and inconsistencies, credibility, and lack of transparency. Consideration of the IPR into charter should not be a question, no. The Auditor's Office monitors practices, programs, policies, not manage offices. The Auditor's Office, the IPR should be put underneath a judge for disciplining practices and patterns. The charter is valuable for it allows we the people to vote if a shift needs to be made, not just a handful of city council members who are fixed with a culture of making decisions in a nanosecond in their best interest. Charter helps restore the credibility that we the people should have of the auditor's office. It allows the auditor's office to simply do its job. When groups or individuals have the power to hover over auditor's office, it suppresses the auditor's ability to fulfill its mission. I support the need to create a budget process. In prior discussions, I have expressed the need for independent audits of some of our bureaus with untrackable tracking spendings. Where there are little to no trails, tracking can be quite difficult. Establishing an independent budget clearly says you can't touch it. Then the fear factor of the auditor's budget being detracted is no longer there. When the auditor's office can count on an expected budget When it's needed, it opens more opportunities for independence. When many groups or individuals have been granted so much power, but has never understood the administration of the powers, we have witnessed these results of the outcome over and over again. The writer Edgar Poe said, "Be not the first by whom the new is tried, nor the last to lay the old aside." Many changes outlined by the Auditor's Office are not new. Laying the antiquated, the old aside is a necessity for positive change. And in closing, my closing statement begins with 3 carefully chosen words: cut the cord. The cord, that source of power connected to the Auditor's Office that does not allow it to function as it is designed to function, or as we the people expect it should function, with independence, transparency, and justice. I see real value of the Auditor's Office needing its independence legal advice from the city attorney, because the city attorney needs to be separate. She needs her own. The Auditor's Office, it needs its own legal advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Roger Leachman, and I serve on the board of the Goose Hollow Foothills League. Tip O'Neill famously said, "All politics is local." True or not, it has more appeal than the national, where Professor Lasky's words, written over half a century ago, have a bitter irony. The elaborate farce of the Electoral College is still enacted, even though all the world knows that it has lost any meaning. Back to the local. Nothing is more local than a neighborhood association. Citizens, neighbors come together, discuss robustly the issues that affect them, and take action. We proudly follow Bud Clark's charge to our association, that it was founded by residents and business owners to defend Goose Hollow from outside forces not acting in the neighborhood's best interest, and to create a vision of better livability. In that advocacy, we often can relate to Commissioner Udaley's description at the work session of people who felt disenchanted and unheard by their city. So where can they turn? Where can the general citizenry find a little hope? We take heart then when the Ombudsman calls out BPS over conflicts of interest during the West Quadrant process, a report for which she got a lot of grief, as you have heard. Prima facie evidence, she's doing her job, and why her office should be in charter and not just in code. We take heart from the auditor's report on ONI. Without these exercises in accountability, how would reform, much needed reform, come about? How would more respect and trust in the government of our city be fostered? Ensuring transparency and accountability is the auditor's charge. Give her the means to follow that. As my friend Mark said earlier, it's a no-brainer. I urge you to refer it to the voters. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
The next 3 are Suzanne Leonard, Kasia Rutledge, and Deanna Mueller-Crispin. And we'll go with Mark Kramer.
Is that okay, Dan? I thought we finished. I still have to carry this up. I'm sorry. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Thank
Mayor.
you. I
Good afternoon,
apologize.
Commissioners.
Thank you.
I'm Suzanne Leonard. I'm co-founder and director of the International Making Cities Livable Council and resident downtown. I respectfully encourage you to accept the city auditor's proposed charter amendment and place it on the May ballot. It's essential that the city auditor's office is independent, free from the fact or appearance of conflicts of interest. The public expect and deserve transparency and accountability in their city government. The Charter's 4 amendments are most appropriate, placing the independent police review and the office, especially the Office of Ombudsman, into charter. Authorizing the auditor to obtain independent legal advice that is focused on the mission of the auditor's office. Creating an independent budget process that ensures the auditor's office is appropriately funded and insulated from political interference, and affirming the auditor's office is autonomous from the Office of Management and Finance and other bureaus. I hope Portland will lead the way in government accountability and transparency. Please accept the charter amendment and place it on the May ballot. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just need to say, as soon as one of our colleagues gets back, I have to leave, unfortunately. I have a city business appointment that I need to get to. But I will watch the remainder of the testimony and expect to participate in the discussion next week.
I think we're the last speakers.
Thank you.
Oh, are you? Oh, well, in that case, I'll just listen to
Are these, I'm sorry, Carla, are these the last speakers? Madam Clerk, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are these the last speakers?
So, yes.
Oh,
Okay,
okay,
then that-
great, fabulous.
Yes, that works. Thank you.
My name is,
Thank you. Is that okay with the auditor? Thank you.
my name is Mark Kramer. I'm a member of the Portland chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, Mayor Wheeler and Council. The Portland chapter of the National Lawyers Guild supports the auditor's proposal. For over a decade, we've been intimately involved in police accountability in Portland. I was part of Mayor Katz's 2000 work group. I was part of Mayor Adams' 2010 work group. We were going to be part of the work group that the former mayor was going to initiate last fall. So through that time, we've come to know the ways in which the auditor's lack of independence negatively impacts the effectiveness of its programs. The credibility of the ombudsman and IPR depends entirely on the independence of the auditor from the city. The most obvious problem, particularly from a lawyer's point of view, is the auditor's lack of independent counsel. The Guild, along with many other organizations, recommended independent counsel as part of the 2010 Stakeholder Committee. Unfortunately, that proposal did not reach fruition. Regardless of whether the city attorney's joint representation of the city and the auditor's office, and in particular IPR, is an ongoing ethical conflict of interest, there are times in which the auditor takes positions which are materially adverse to the city. For example, the Guild and other groups are upset and concerned about PPB's use of rubber bullets and tear gas at the J20 demonstrations. There have been and will be complaints filed with IPR. The same city attorney's office is going to be advising PPB on the use of rubber bullets, on the use of tear gas, on the application of force, is going to be advising IPR, who's going to be investigating that. That's a conflict of interest. This perceived conflict, whether real or not, reduces transparency in government and creates a lack of trust in the auditor's services. This, in turn, is part of the lack of trust of IPR, and that, in turn, causes litigation when litigation is not necessary in every case. If we had a credible police accountability system, and the auditor's proposal is one step toward that, many citizens' complaints that head to court could be resolved otherwise. The Guild strongly urges the city to adopt the auditor's charter changes and to do so now. Making changes to code will not be sufficient because what the council creates in code can be changed. It is also in the city's best interest to propose these charter changes immediately to increase confidence in the auditor's programs, and we appreciate your thoughtful consideration of the auditor's proposal.
Thank you, sir. Last but not least.
Well, we'll see. I'm Deanna Mueller-Crispin. I live in the West End. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I do urge you to support the city auditor's proposed changes to give the auditor's office, including the ombudsman, real independent authority, as so many people have said this afternoon. Among the ombudsman's duties are receiving and investigating citizen complaints against administrative acts of city government, which of course includes complaints against conflicts of interest, which applies as well to appointees to boards and city volunteers. I got a lot of this from your website, such as stakeholder advisory committees, SACs, and you've heard quite a bit about that today. However, I would like to point out that without the ombudsman's taking up of this issue, these conflicts of interest would never have come to public light. It has to come to public light in order to maintain the credibility of government and the faith in our government. However, it certainly seems clear to most of us that the auditor's office and the ombudsman cannot have much power to affect real change in behavior of city officials, including employees or appointees, when they are dependent on the city, perhaps on the same offices against which citizen complaints are brought, for their budget and legal services. For example, the ombudsman's requirement or request, I'm not quite sure which, for their ex post facto declarations of conflicts of interest from the West End SAC members have not yet been fully implemented. For real independence and effectiveness, the auditor's office needs to have legal counsel independent, have independent budget, and be able to make their own management decisions. Please put this on the May ballot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I believe we've completed the testimony. We're going to lose our quorum, so with the permission and approval of the auditor, we will continue this next Wednesday at 3:15 p.m. That will be a time certain. We will make sure that there's nothing else after that, so we will have plenty of time to discuss it. I apologize we weren't able to get it all done today, but I think with the number of comments and amendments, it'll probably help us to have that discussion anyway. Commissioner Fish?
Mayor, my hope is that since you're continuing this hearing, it means that we can continue to receive comments from the public in writing or by email. And my hope is that we can take the amendments on the table and see whether they can be resolved. The auditor has to decide which of these concepts she's willing to accept into her proposal. My hope is that at the end of this process, we'll come back next Wednesday with the revised auditor's proposal, a clear understanding if there are any remaining amendments, and that we would simply, Mayor, at that point, take votes on the amendments and on the package.
Very good.
To clarify, we have closed the public testimony in terms of oral, but are accepting written comments through next week.
Right, so that the
Public
hearing,
testimony.
the hearing next week will be for the purpose of reviewing any revised proposal from the auditor, considering any amendments which are still on the table, and then casting the final vote on the referral.
Very good. Last word to the auditor? Please.
Be brought next week, or, okay,
No.
thank you.
No, we're done with amendments and we're done with the testimony.
The only thing, Madam Auditor, that could happen is if there's an amendment on the table which you don't accept in its current form, but you're able to negotiate the
Okay.
way you have on other issues, then I would expect that would be incorporated into a substitute that you would bring.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Final word?
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate all the people who came here today, and I look forward to continuing the discussion next week.
This is excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.